Okay, guys, welcome back. This is episode 2 of my series, The Bible Read by an Atheist. Today, we're going to be talking about the story of the Garden of Eden, the descendants of Adam, as well as Noah's flood. However, today we're going to be doing things a little differently. It's just going to be me and you. Just a little bit of a conversation. I don't want to be doing any visuals. Kind of curious how that would play out. So, to start, right after the story of creation, the book of Genesis continues to talk about the creation of Adam, and soon after the creation of Eve. The two of them would live in harmony in the Garden of Eden until Eve, and then Adam soon after, would grab fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then they would hide from God, and God would find them and expel them from the garden. And then the gates to the garden would be closed forever, guarded by a cherubim. Now, when it comes to what modern science might tell us about some similar events, in my head, I'm thinking this is the jump from instinctual beings to conscious ones. And I'm reminded of a book written in 1992 by Terence McKenna called Food of the Gods. And in this book, he suggests something called the stoned ape theory, an idea where our ancient ancestors were following herds of grazing cattle whose dung would attract different insects. These insects were likely part of the early human diet, and as they were scavenging for this food, they would find mushrooms growing on these cow patties. Not just any mushrooms either. Psilocybe cubensis, or psilocybin, magic mushrooms. Now, as the theory goes, our ancient ancestors would just gorge themselves on these mushrooms all day, every day, as long as they could find them. And with that amount of consumption, you would get an extreme amount of neurogenesis, or the creation of new neurons, new neural pathways. With that, an exponential increase in brain volume over the course of roughly a couple 100,000 years. Now, we know that drug-induced cognitive changes cannot really be passed down genetically. However, it is very well possible that these changes could have been passed down epigenetically, that is, through gene expression, rather than through changes in actual DNA sequence itself. That being said, persistent multi-generational use of these hallucinogens could very well catalyze genuine evolutionary change if those traits it amplifies are advantageous under the novel environmental conditions such behaviors create. Epigenetic plasticity can serve as a bridge, allowing for classical evolutionary adaptation. Now, as we move on from the killing of Abel, we get into the descendants of Adam. 10 generations between the first man and Noah. Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. Their lifespans, hundreds and hundreds of years, even close to 1,000 years like Methuselah. On average, about 857 years. However, it is worth noting that Enoch had a relatively short life comparatively at about a 365-year lifespan. He walked with God and was taken by God and was not. Very interesting line in the Bible, especially when you pair it with the Book of Enoch. That's a different series because holy smokes, that's a lot. But when we do the math, we get 2006 years from the creation of Adam and the death of Noah, which multiplied by 1,000 to get you roughly 2 million, roughly the same amount of time the species Homo has been on the Earth. Now, there are roughly 10 major species between the emergence of Homo and us, Homo sapiens. You have Rudolfensis, habilis, ergaster, antecessor, erectus, heidelbergensis, Neanderthal, Denisovans, and then us, Homo sapiens. Plus, obviously, a couple other species thrown in here and there. But the average time each of these species were roaming the Earth were roughly 886,000 years. And if we multiply the average lifespan of these patriarchs listed in Genesis by 1,000, we actually get 857,000. Now, this gives us a 29,000 year difference, or only about a 3% difference. Now, while this is not a one-to-one comparison of a species and a patriarchal figure, it is pretty damn interesting that these averages line up so close between ancient myth and modern science. Now, on to one of the most dramatic stories in the Bible, the flood. According to the timeline listed out by the Bible, 1,656 years would pass from the creation of Adam till the flood, which is said to have covered the entire earth. Now, Noah, his family, and all of the creatures on the ark were the only things to survive, creating this imagery of a cataclysmic upheaval. You have the fountains of the deep bursting open and the floodgates of the sky bursting open. But what does modern science tell us about global floods and ancient disasters? Well, here's where things get real interesting. Scientists have actually found evidence pointing towards a sudden, violent period called the Younger Dryas, around 12,900 years ago. This era saw the Earth plunge back into a near glacial cold period, following a brief warming period. Now, while the science is still out on this one, the most compelling theory for this abrupt cooling is either a massive volcanic event or some sort of impact, a comet or a meteorite striking in North America, causing this global chaos. Now, the heat generated from either one of these events would have caused a lot of these ice sheets across the globe to melt. And with these ice sheets melting, they would have released colossal flooding of fresh water, which would have completely disrupted the ocean's circulation, especially the thermohaline circulation, which controls the world's climate. Debris from these supposed events have actually been found across North America, Europe, and even parts of the Middle East. Some say this points to a truly global event, one capable of unleashing forces similar to that seen in the Bible. Now, what's truly fascinating here is the timeline. When you do the math using the biblical timeline, the difference between the age of the earth and the flood is remarkably close to scientific estimations when we use a couple calculations. Using the biblical ages, if the earth is roughly 6,000 years old, the flood happened about 4,344 years ago. If we multiply that by 3, we get 13,032. That's a difference of 130 years. That's negligible. Moreover, the tale of Gilgamesh, written 4,000 years ago, describes a very similar flood. In fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these flood myths across different cultures all over the world. The convergence of these myths with the alignment of our new scientific understanding of the Younger Dryas points towards possibly a true global cataclysm which we have held on to in scripture and in stories. Genesis ends the flood myth with Noah's ark resting on the mountains of Ararat and God vowing to never wipe his creation off the face of the earth, symbolized by the rainbow. Now, intriguingly, this region actually has geomorphological indicators of abrupt and ancient climate shifts. Now, obviously there's no proof of an ark, but that area does symbolize a link between myth and the environment. Thank you for watching. I know it was a hot take. Leave your comments below, like, comment, subscribe, share the video. I appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.